The fastest way to discover who someone really is to watch how they treat people who can do nothing for them. On a cool October evening in downtown Chicago, the grand ballroom of the Lakeshore Heritage Foundation sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's annual salaries. Waiters moved between elegantly dressed guests carrying silver trays of sparkling water and appetizers, while a jazz quartet played softly in the corner. It was the kind of event where successful people came to be seen, where business cards changed hands as often as handshakes, and where reputations could quietly rise or fall in a single conversation. Jason Walker loved rooms like this. In fact, he lived for them. At 44, Jason had built a reputation as a successful consultant known for landing major contracts and commanding attention wherever he went. Tall, confident, and always dressed in expensive tailored suits, he carried himself with the certainty of a man who believed he was the smartest person in every room. Unfortunately, he also believed that everyone else existed for his entertainment. As laughter echoed across a nearby table, Jason leaned back in his chair and pointed toward a nervous young waiter who had accidentally placed the wrong drink in front of a guest. "Well, there's a future CEO," Jason announced loudly enough for several tables to hear. If mixing up water and sparkling water is the biggest challenge of his career, maybe he'll survive. A few guests chuckled. Others looked away. The waiter forced an uncomfortable smile and quietly apologized before correcting the mistake. Most people would have let the moment pass. Jason never did. "Don't worry," he continued, raising his glass. "Everyone starts somewhere. Some people just stay there." More laughter followed. The waiter's face reddened, but he remained professional and walked away. Jason seemed pleased with himself. Making people laugh at someone else's expense was one of his favorite hobbies. It always had been. Across the ballroom, a few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had seen this behavior before. Jason never missed an opportunity to remind others of their place, especially if he considered them beneath him. Whether it was an assistant, a server, a junior employee, or even a stranger, he treated every interaction like a stage performance designed to make himself look superior. The strange thing was that many people tolerated it because of his success. Success had a way of making flaws appear smaller than they really were. As the evening continued, Jason moved effortlessly from group to group, telling stories, making jokes, and collecting attention. Yet beneath the polished smiles surrounding him, not everyone was impressed. Near the back of the ballroom, partially hidden beside a large display honoring donors, a woman watched him quietly. She had arrived alone and had spent most of the evening avoiding the spotlight. Her dark blue dress was elegant without being flashy, and her calm expression revealed very little. Unlike the others, she did not laugh when Jason mocked people. She simply observed. When Jason glanced in her direction, his eyes passed over her without recognition. He had no idea who she was. To him, she was just another guest among hundreds. But the woman knew exactly who he was. She knew his voice, his habits, and the particular smile that appeared whenever he believed he had embarrassed someone. Years had passed since she had last stood beside him, yet some things never changed. As another round of laughter erupted from Jason's table, the woman looked down briefly before returning her gaze to the crowd. There was no anger on her face, no bitterness, only quiet certainty. Meanwhile, Jason remained completely unaware that fate had already entered the room. He lifted his glass, accepted another compliment, and continued enjoying the attention. What he didn't know was that before the night was over, he would come face to face with a person from his past, and that encounter would begin a chain of events capable of changing everything he believed about success, respect, and himself. 3 hours earlier, before the foundation gala filled with music and polished smiles, Emily had stood alone in her hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan. The city lights stretched across the water like scattered stars, and for a moment, she found herself thinking about another Chicago evening many years ago when she had looked out a different window and imagined a very different future. Back then, she had still believed that love could fix almost anything. She had believed patience could soften harsh words. She had believed loyalty would eventually be appreciated. Most of all, she had believed Jason would change. When Emily first met Jason, he had been charming, ambitious, and endlessly confident. Friends described him as driven. Business associates called him charismatic. He had a way of making every conversation feel exciting. as though he was inviting people into a larger and more successful version of life. Emily admired that confidence. She came from a modest family in a small Illinois town where people valued kindness more than status. Her father taught high school history. Her mother worked part-time at the local library. Growing up, Emily learned that character mattered more than appearances. Jason represented a world she had never experienced before. During their first year together, everything seemed promising. He spoke about dreams, business opportunities, travel, and building a future. Emily supported him through long work weeks and unpredictable schedules. She celebrated every victory and encouraged him through every setback. When Jason proposed, she believed she was marrying a man who would build a life beside her. The changes happened slowly enough that she almost missed them at first. It started with small comments disguised as jokes. If she expressed an opinion during dinner with friends, Jason would laugh and say, "That is why I handle the important decisions." Everyone would chuckle, including Emily. When she cooked a meal he did not particularly enjoy, he would smile and tell guests, "Good thing she is pretty because she is definitely not opening a restaurant." Again, people laughed. Again, Emily laughed too. She told herself it was harmless. Over time, however, the jokes became more frequent. They became sharper, more personal. Jason seemed to enjoy the reaction he received whenever he made someone else the target of a clever remark. The laughter became a reward. The attention became addictive. Eventually, Emily noticed something unsettling. Jason was not only making fun of strangers or coworkers. He was using her as material as well. At parties, he would point out her mistakes. During family gatherings, he would tell embarrassing stories from years earlier. At business events, he sometimes spoke as though her accomplishments were insignificant compared to his own. Every time it happened, she felt a little smaller. Every time she tried to discuss it privately, Jason dismissed her concerns. "You are too sensitive," he would say. "People know I am joking." But Emily began paying attention to the expressions on other people's faces. Some laughed because they felt pressured. Some looked uncomfortable. Others simply stayed silent. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Jason did not use humor to connect with people. He used it to establish superiority. The more successful he became, the worse it got. As his income increased and his reputation grew, he started surrounding himself with people who rarely challenged him. Compliments flowed freely. Criticism disappeared. Success created an echo chamber where every opinion seemed to confirm his belief that he was always right. Emily often found herself making excuses for him. She explained away rude comments. She smoothed over awkward interactions. She apologized to people after events ended. What she did not realize was that she was carrying emotional responsibilities that did not belong to her. One Thanksgiving dinner changed something inside her. Jason had invited several business associates to their home. Emily spent nearly 2 days preparing the meal. She cleaned, cooked, decorated, and coordinated every detail. By the time guests arrived, everything looked perfect. During dessert, one of Jason's colleagues complimented the evening and praised Emily for her effort. Instead of thanking her, Jason laughed. "Trust me," he said. "If I had not reminded her 20 times, half this dinner would still be frozen." The table laughed politely. Emily forced a smile. Inside, she felt something crack. It was not the joke itself. It was the realization that Jason could not allow her to receive credit for anything without finding a way to diminish it. Driving home from a holiday gathering a few months later, Emily finally asked him a question she had avoided for years. "Why do you always need to make someone look small?" Jason barely looked away from the road. "I do not." "You do," she said quietly. "You always do." He sighed dramatically. "Emily, successful people need confidence. Not everyone understands that. Confidence is not the same thing as humiliation." Jason laughed. "You spend too much time worrying about feelings." That conversation stayed with her for weeks, then months. The more she reflected on it, the more she understood something painful. Jason did not see a problem because the behavior benefited him. Every joke elevated him. Every insult entertained him. Every uncomfortable silence protected him from accountability. Eventually, Emily stopped arguing. She stopped trying to convince him. Instead, she began paying attention to her own future. She enrolled in professional development courses. She expanded skills she had neglected during the marriage. She attended conferences and networking events on her own. Quietly, she started rebuilding parts of herself she had sacrificed. Jason hardly noticed. If he did, He assumed it was another hobby that would fade. Then one spring morning, Emily sat alone in a coffee shop and admitted a truth she had been avoiding. She no longer recognized the life she was living. More importantly, she no longer recognized herself. The woman she had once been was buried beneath years of self-doubt, caution, and disappointment. For the first time, leaving felt less frightening than staying. The divorce surprised many people. Friends assumed Jason would fight for the marriage. Instead, he treated it like another inconvenience. He told people they had simply grown apart. He acted as though the end of a decade-long relationship barely affected him. Publicly, he remained confident. Emily moved into a small apartment and began starting over. There were difficult days, lonely days, days when she questioned everything. Yet something unexpected happened as time passed. Without constant criticism surrounding her, she started hearing her own voice again. Her confidence returned slowly. Her goals became clearer. Opportunities appeared where she had once seen obstacles. And while Jason continued climbing social ladders and collecting admiration, Emily focused on building something much quieter and much more meaningful. Years later, standing in that hotel room before the gala, she looked at her reflection and smiled faintly. Very few people knew the full story of what had happened after the divorce. Very few people knew what she had spent those years creating. The secret remained hers alone. As she picked up her invitation and prepared to leave for the evening event, she remembered the last thing Jason had ever said to her before they parted ways. "You will never accomplish anything without me." Emily had not argued then. She had simply walked away. And now, as she headed downstairs toward the ballroom where destiny was quietly waiting, she carried a truth that Jason could not possibly imagine. The first year after the divorce was not glamorous. Emily worked long hours, attended evening classes, and spent countless weekends learning skills that most people took years to master. While others relaxed, she studied market trends, leadership strategies, and business operations. She was not chasing revenge. She was chasing freedom. There was a difference. Every small achievement felt significant because it belonged entirely to her. No one could take credit for it. No one could diminish it with a joke. No one could stand beside her and explain why her success mattered less than theirs. One afternoon, nearly 18 months after the divorce, Emily attended a professional conference in Milwaukee. She almost did not go. The registration fee seemed expensive at the time, and she questioned whether the trip would be worth it. Looking back later, she would realize that single decision changed the course of her life. During a networking session, she met Richard Bennett, a respected entrepreneur nearing retirement. Unlike many successful people Emily had encountered, Richard listened more than he spoke. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered details. Most importantly, he treated everyone in the room with equal respect, whether they were executives or interns. Over several conversations, Richard became impressed by Emily's work ethic and practical ideas. Months later, he invited her to collaborate on a small consulting project. The project led to another, then another. Each opportunity expanded her experience and introduced her to people who valued competence over appearances. For the first time in years, Emily felt seen for who she truly was. As her professional network grew, so did her confidence. She stopped measuring herself against the expectations that had once defined her marriage. Instead, she focused on solving problems, building relationships, and creating value. The results began speaking for themselves. By the fourth year after the divorce, Emily had become a trusted advisor on several major projects. Her reputation spread quietly but steadily. Clients appreciated her honesty. Partners respected her preparation. Teams enjoyed working with her because she never felt the need to prove her importance by making others feel unimportant. Ironically, many of the qualities Jason had dismissed turned out to be her greatest strengths. Patience built trust. Kindness built loyalty. Humility opened doors that arrogance never could. Yet despite her growing success, very few people knew the full extent of what she was accomplishing. Emily preferred it that way. She avoided unnecessary attention and focused on the work itself. Meanwhile, news about Jason occasionally reached her through mutual acquaintances. At first, everything sounded familiar. Bigger contracts, bigger events, bigger recognition. But gradually the stories began to change. Former colleagues mentioned tensions inside his company. A longtime client had chosen another firm. Certain partnerships had quietly ended. None of it seemed dramatic on its own, but together they formed a pattern. Emily listened without judgment. She had spent too much energy in the past worrying about Jason's choices. Those days were over. Then, 6 months before the gala, Richard invited Emily to join a confidential venture involving several influential investors and business leaders. The opportunity was unlike anything she had encountered before. The project carried enormous potential and would place her in rooms that once seemed completely out of reach. She accepted. What she did not know at the time was that the decision would eventually bring her back into Jason's world. Not because she sought him out. Not because she wanted closure. Simply because life has a way of bringing people together when lessons remain unfinished. Back in the ballroom, as guests continued mingling beneath the chandeliers, Emily watched Jason entertaining another circle of admirers. He looked exactly as confident as she remembered. The same smile, the same posture, the same certainty that he controlled every room he entered. What he could not see was how much the world around him had already begun to change. And what he could never have predicted was that before the week ended, their paths would cross again under circumstances neither of them could ignore. For years, Jason believed success made him untouchable. Whenever a deal worked out, it confirmed what he already thought about himself. Whenever someone praised his leadership, it reinforced the idea that his approach was justified. He measured life through results, and as long as the numbers looked good, he saw no reason to change. That confidence began to crack in ways so subtle that he barely noticed at first. The first warning arrived during a quarterly review with one of his largest clients. The partnership had lasted nearly 6 years, and Jason expected the renewal to be routine. Instead, the meeting felt unusually cold. Questions that had once been answered with trust were now met with hesitation. Concerns that had previously been overlooked were suddenly being discussed in detail. When the contract was eventually awarded to another consulting firm, Jason dismissed it as a temporary setback. He told himself the client had made a mistake. He assured his team that another opportunity would appear. Publicly, he remained confident. Privately, he was irritated. Then another contract disappeared. Then another. None of them were catastrophic on their own, but together they created pressure that slowly spread throughout the company. Revenue projections became less predictable. Long-term plans required revision. Investors began asking uncomfortable questions. Jason blamed market conditions. He blamed competitors. He blamed changing industry trends. The one thing he never blamed was himself. Around the office, however, people were beginning to notice a pattern. Employees rarely stayed longer than necessary. Team morale had quietly declined over the years. Talented professionals accepted positions elsewhere. Some left for better opportunities. Others simply wanted healthier environments. Jason viewed departures as signs of weakness. In reality, many people were exhausted. They were tired of being interrupted during meetings. Tired of having good ideas dismissed before they could be fully explained. Tired of watching coworkers become the target of sarcastic comments whenever mistakes occurred. Respect, once lost repeatedly, eventually stopped growing back. One Tuesday morning, Jason entered the conference room expecting a standard leadership meeting. Instead, he found several department heads unusually reserved. The discussion focused on operational challenges, client retention, and internal communication issues. For the first time, someone directly suggested that company culture might be contributing to the problems. The room fell silent. Jason laughed. "You are telling me our culture is costing us millions of dollars." The executive carefully chose his words. "I am saying relationships matter more than they used to." Jason leaned back in his chair. "Relationships have always mattered." The executive nodded slowly. "That is exactly the point." Nobody said another word. The meeting ended shortly afterward, but the conversation lingered in Jason's mind. Not because he believed it, but because he disliked being challenged. Over the following months, more warning signs appeared. Several long-term industry contacts stopped returning calls as quickly as before. Invitations to exclusive networking events became less frequent. Strategic partnerships stalled. The professional goodwill he had spent years assuming would always exist suddenly felt less dependable. One evening, after a disappointing client presentation, Jason attended a private gathering hosted by an influential business leader. In previous years, he would have been the center of attention. This time, conversations seemed to flow around him rather than toward him. People remained polite, but something had changed. During the event, he approached a former colleague named Daniel, someone he had known for nearly a decade. Jason expected the usual friendly conversation. Instead, Daniel kept his responses brief. Eventually, Jason asked directly, "Is something wrong?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Do you want the honest version?" Jason frowned. "Of course." Daniel looked at him carefully. "You have spent years treating people like they were beneath you. Some of them moved on. Some became decision makers. Some became clients. Some became competitors. People remember how you make them feel." Jason immediately rejected the criticism. "That sounds dramatic." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe, but it is also true." The conversation ended there. Yet for reasons Jason could not explain, he thought about those words for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, Emily continued focusing on her own responsibilities. The confidential venture she had joined was expanding rapidly. Investor confidence remained strong. New opportunities emerged almost weekly. Her reputation continued growing among leaders who valued integrity and long-term thinking. She never discussed Jason. She never asked about him. The past no longer controlled her future. Still, circumstances were moving in a direction neither of them could see. 3 weeks after the charity gala, Jason received an invitation marked confidential. The message came from a prestigious investment consortium known for backing major business initiatives across the country. Securing a partnership with them could solve many of the challenges his company currently faced. It could restore confidence. It could stabilize growth. It could open doors that had recently begun closing. The invitation included details for a private evaluation meeting scheduled in Chicago. Jason immediately accepted. For the first time in months, genuine optimism returned. He spent days preparing presentations, reviewing financial projections, and refining his strategy. This opportunity felt different, important, necessary. By the morning of the meeting, he convinced himself that everything was about to turn around. As his car moved through downtown traffic, he rehearsed talking points and imagined favorable outcomes. The building itself reflected the influence of the organization behind it. Modern architecture, elegant design, quiet confidence. The kind of place where major decisions happened behind closed doors. Jason entered the lobby, checked in with reception, and was escorted to an executive conference floor overlooking the city skyline. Several other professionals waited nearby. Some reviewed documents. Others exchanged introductions. Jason recognized a few faces and immediately began networking. Confidence returned to his voice. His posture straightened. For a brief moment, it felt like old times. Then the meeting coordinator arrived and informed everyone that the lead representative would join them shortly. The room settled into anticipation. Minutes passed. A large conference room door opened at the far end of the hallway. Several senior executives entered first. Behind them came a woman carrying a portfolio and speaking quietly with another board member. Jason glanced up casually. Then he froze. Every sound around him seemed to disappear. The hallway, the conversations, the movement. All of it faded into the background as recognition hit him with unexpected force. Standing among the leadership team, completely at ease and clearly respected by everyone around her, was Emily. She looked composed, confident, and entirely comfortable in a world Jason had never imagined her entering. The executives welcomed her as an equal. One of them even paused to ask her opinion before proceeding into the conference room. Emily answered calmly, and the group listened. Jason stared in disbelief. The woman he once claimed would accomplish nothing without him had just walked into the most important meeting of his year as one of the people holding the power to shape its outcome. And as she turned toward the room, her eyes briefly met his for the first time in years. For a brief second, neither of them moved. Emily recognized him immediately, but unlike Jason, she showed no sign of surprise. Her expression remained calm and professional, the same expression she had worn while speaking with the executives beside her. Then she offered a polite nod before continuing toward the conference room. The simple gesture unsettled Jason more than he wanted to admit. He had imagined many scenarios over the years. If he ever saw Emily again, he assumed she would be emotional, angry, defensive, or eager to prove something. Instead, she looked completely at peace. More importantly, she looked as though she belonged exactly where she was. Jason watched as the leadership team gathered around her. They spoke with familiarity and respect. One executive introduced her to a newly arrived investor. Another thanked her for a recommendation that had helped secure a recent partnership. Nobody treated her like a guest. Nobody treated her like an observer. She was clearly one of the people helping make decisions. The realization was difficult to process. Years ago, he had believed Emily depended on him. Now he found himself standing in a room where his own future might depend on her. Moments later, everyone took their seats around a long conference table overlooking the Chicago skyline. Jason found his assigned chair and quietly reviewed his presentation materials, though he barely absorbed a word on the pages. Across the room, Emily sat beside several senior board members. The placement alone revealed her influence. After brief introductions, the meeting officially began. The consortium's chairperson welcomed attendees and explained the purpose of the evaluation process. Several organizations were being considered for strategic partnerships and investment opportunities. Financial performance mattered, but leadership quality, organizational culture, and long-term sustainability would also factor heavily into the final decision. As the discussion progressed, Jason gradually learned more about Emily's role. Over the past several years, she had become one of the most trusted advisors within the consortium's expanding network. Her expertise in partnership development and organizational strategy had helped guide multiple successful initiatives. She was not simply participating in the process. She had helped design parts of it. Every new detail felt like another piece of a puzzle Jason had never known existed. Eventually, his turn arrived. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and moved to the front of the room. Years of experience allowed him to present confidently despite the turmoil running through his thoughts. He outlined growth strategies, market opportunities, and operational plans. His delivery remained polished. His numbers were strong. Several board members took notes. Others asked questions. For a while, everything seemed to be moving in a positive direction. Then one board member raised a topic Jason had hoped to avoid. Can you explain recent client retention challenges? The question was fair. It was also difficult. Jason provided a carefully structured response involving industry shifts, economic uncertainty, and changing market conditions. The explanation sounded reasonable. It might even have been convincing if the conversation had ended there. Instead, another board member followed with a second question. Several reports mention employee turnover concerns. What steps are being taken to improve internal retention? Jason felt tension tightening in his chest. He answered again, emphasizing recruitment efforts and workplace initiatives. The room remained attentive. Then, for the first time since the meeting began, Emily spoke. Her voice was calm, professional, measured. When organizations experience repeated turnover, do you believe leadership behavior can play a role in those outcomes? The question was not hostile. In fact, it was delivered with remarkable neutrality. Yet Jason felt as though the air had suddenly become heavier. Every eye in the room shifted toward him. Leadership always plays a role, he replied carefully. Emily nodded. And how do you personally evaluate the impact of leadership culture on long-term business performance? Again, the question was reasonable. Again, it carried no visible judgment. Yet Jason struggled to answer with his usual certainty. The discussion continued, moving through topics involving trust, communication, collaboration, and organizational reputation. Throughout the exchange, Emily remained professional. She never mentioned their past. She never embarrassed him. She never attempted to expose old wounds. She simply participated as she would with any other candidate. Ironically, that professionalism made the situation even more uncomfortable. Jason had spent years believing he understood power. Sitting across from Emily, he realized how limited that understanding had been. True influence did not require intimidation. It did not require controlling conversations. It did not require making others feel inferior. Emily possessed influence because people trusted her judgment. The meeting eventually concluded, and participants began gathering their materials. Jason remained seated for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. As attendees filtered out of the room, he noticed several executives stopping to speak with Emily. They sought her input. They thanked her for her time. They valued her perspective. Eventually, the room emptied until only a handful of people remained. Emily organized her notes and prepared to leave. Before she reached the door, Jason stood. Emily. She turned calmly. Hello, Jason. Hearing his name spoken so simply felt strangely unsettling. I had no idea you were involved with this organization. Most people do not know everything I am involved with, she replied politely. The answer was neither arrogant nor defensive. It was simply true. Jason hesitated. You have done well for yourself. A faint smile appeared. Thank you. Another silence followed. Years earlier, Jason would have filled that silence with jokes, explanations, or attempts to regain control of the conversation. Now he found himself searching for words. I guess I underestimated you. Emily studied him for a moment. You underestimated a lot of people, Jason. The statement landed softly, yet its impact was impossible to ignore. She had not raised her voice. She had not accused him of anything. She had simply spoken an uncomfortable truth. Jason looked away briefly. For perhaps the first time in years, he felt genuinely embarrassed. Not because someone had humiliated him, because he suddenly recognized how often he had humiliated others. Emily adjusted the portfolio in her hands. For what it is worth, I never wanted to prove you wrong. Jason looked back at her. What do you mean? After the divorce, I spent a long time rebuilding my life. At some point, I realized something important. She paused briefly. The goal was never to become more successful than you. The goal was to become the person I was always capable of being. Jason remained silent. Emily continued. Success is easier when you stop trying to earn permission from people who never intended to give it. Those words stayed with him. They reflected a reality he had never considered. Throughout their marriage, he had assumed he was the one defining value. He had assumed he possessed the authority to determine what mattered and what did not. Standing there now, he realized how wrong that assumption had been. A person did not become smaller because someone else treated them that way. Sometimes they simply needed distance to grow. A notification appeared on Emily's phone. She glanced at the screen and then looked back at Jason. I need to get to another meeting. He nodded. Of course. She started toward the door before stopping one final time. Good luck with the evaluation process. Again, there was no sarcasm, no hidden insult, no desire for revenge. She genuinely wished him well. Then she left. Jason remained alone in the conference room overlooking the city. The skyline stretched toward the horizon exactly as it had when the meeting began. Yet everything felt different now. For years he had believed that success belonged to the loudest voice, the strongest personality, the person capable of dominating every room. Emily's journey had revealed a different truth entirely. Respect could create opportunities that arrogance never could. Kindness could build relationships that money could not buy. And while Jason had spent years collecting admiration, Emily had spent those same years earning trust. One disappeared when circumstances changed. The other only became more valuable with time. For the first time in a very long while, Jason was forced to confront a question he had spent years avoiding. If so many relationships around him were weakening, if so many opportunities were slipping away, and if so many people seemed unwilling to stand beside him when challenges appeared, perhaps the problem was not the market. Perhaps the problem was not the economy. Perhaps the problem had been staring back at him in the mirror all along. The consortium completed its evaluation process several weeks later. Jason's company was not selected for the partnership he had hoped would reverse his declining momentum. The decision was disappointing, but what surprised him most was his reaction. For the first time in years, he did not immediately blame competitors, market conditions, or bad luck. Instead, he spent long evenings reflecting on conversations he had spent years dismissing. Daniel's warning, the concerns raised by employees, the uncomfortable questions during the evaluation meeting, and above all, Emily's quiet observation that he had underestimated a lot of people. The more he thought about it, the harder it became to deny the truth. Throughout his career, he had mistaken attention for respect. He had confused intimidation with leadership. He had believed making others feel smaller somehow made him larger. Yet when challenges arrived, the applause disappeared far faster than genuine loyalty would have. Over the following months, Jason began making changes that would have seemed impossible to his former self. He listened more during meetings. He interrupted less. When employees shared ideas, he gave them room to finish speaking. He even started apologizing when he realized he had handled situations poorly. Some people were skeptical. Others assumed the changes would not last. Jason understood why. Trust, once damaged repeatedly, could not be repaired overnight. It had to be earned one interaction at a time. Progress came slowly, but it came. Relationships that had grown distant became more productive. Workplace morale improved. A few former clients even agreed to reopen conversations. The transformation was not dramatic enough for headlines, yet it was significant in a way that mattered far more. Jason was finally becoming aware of the impact he had on the people around him. One afternoon nearly a year later, he attended another charitable event in Chicago. The ballroom was different, but the atmosphere felt familiar. Business leaders mingled. Conversations filled the room. Servers moved gracefully between tables. At one point, a young employee accidentally spilled a small amount of sparkling water near a guest. The young man immediately apologized, clearly embarrassed. Years earlier, Jason would have turned the moment into a joke. He would have searched for a laugh at someone else's expense. Instead, he smiled and handed the employee a napkin. "Do not worry about it," he said. "Everybody makes mistakes." The employee looked relieved and thanked him before returning to work. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it revealed how much had changed. Later that evening, Jason noticed Emily across the room speaking with several colleagues. Once again, people listened attentively when she spoke. Once again, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Their eyes met briefly, and this time Jason walked over. "Emily," he said. She smiled warmly. "Hello, Jason." He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I never properly thanked you." Her expression reflected genuine curiosity. "For what?" Jason glanced around the room before answering. "For showing me something I should have learned a long time ago." Emily understood immediately. She did not appear triumphant. She did not appear vindicated. She simply nodded. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice was not revenge. Sometimes it was growth. As the evening continued, both returned to their conversations, moving through the crowd in different directions. Years earlier, Jason had believed success was measured by how important a person appeared. Now he understood something far more valuable. Real success was reflected in how people felt after interacting with you. Because respect cost nothing to give, yet its value could shape an entire life.